Thanks so much for being with us today. I hope you have your message outline ready to go. Here's the first fill in the blank on your message outline. The easiest person to deceive is the person in the mirror. It's you. It's me. We'll talk about why that is true in just a moment. But I want you to think about this next fill in the blank. Isn't it true that you and I have deceived ourselves? We've sold ourselves on every bad decision that we've ever made. Even worse, you and I are the masterminds behind most of our regrettable decisions. We sometimes are our own worst enemies. And whether these decisions relate to finances, spiritual, relational, or whatever, we're the masterminds behind those regrettable decisions. Look at this next fill in the blank. Isn't it also true that you and I have done more to undermine our own success and our own progress more than anybody else on planet Earth? Now, it's certainly true that there's outside forces that have been at work in our lives as well. But in most cases, didn't we decide not to carefully weigh all the options, not to seek wise counsel? In fact, we probably did the opposite. We listened to that sales associate that lives inside of our minds, inside of our heads. We listened to his or her sales pitch and we fell for them. Here's what we did. We ignored the idea that I know better, and we started selling ourselves on what we wanted in that moment. We're on part 2 of a message series we began just last week entitled Better Decisions and Fewer Regrets. The big idea of this message series, these next few things are going to be on the screen but not on your outline. Just a quick review for you. The big idea of the series is this, that we often overlook the relationship between good questions and good decisions. Now here's what good questions do for us. Good questions set us up for good decisions. And one of the things that we said last week, and I firmly believe this, that if you and I will ask, honestly answer, and act on the 5 questions we're going to look at in this series, you will make better decisions and you will have fewer regrets. And perhaps most important is this. Not only will your life be better, but the people who look to you, depend on you, need you, they will be better off too, because we are not the only ones impacted by our decisions and certainly not by our regrets as well. We also, last week, we looked at this verse. This is on your message outline. It's a wisdom saying found in Proverbs 27:12. I hope that you have learned it. In fact, if you know it, say it out loud with me. If not, read it out loud with me. Again, the wisdom writer tells us this, that the prudent person sees danger, and what do? They take refuge. But the simple person keeps going, and they pay the penalty, or you may have memorized it from this translation, they suffer the consequences. 2 pictures I showed you last week that illustrate this. We've all seen a sign like this. This sign says, bridge out ahead. Not that the bridge is out of order. The bridge is out. It's dangerous. And so there's a detour sign. The wise person sees that, and what do? They take refuge. They take the detour. On the other hand, this foolish person comes. They see the exact same signs. They ignore it. They go around the sign, and they believe this. This applies to everyone else but me. I'm special, I'm different, this doesn't apply to me. So they go the other way and they wind up in the drink, if you would. Here's what a wise person does. A prudent, wise person takes into consideration the long-term results of whatever options they're considering. In other words, they're kind of connecting the dots. They know that today's decisions show up in tomorrow's outcomes. But notice this, the simple person. And by simple person, we're simply talking about someone who's naive, someone who believes almost anything. They don't take the time to ask questions. They don't look ahead. They don't consider the outcomes. But the simple person opts for now rather than later. Now over later. And instead of asking these 5 questions we're going to be looking at, they listen to the sales associate in their head. And the sales associate wants them to act fast and wants them to act now. The salesperson in our mind wants us to focus on the immediate rather than the ultimate. Proverbs 27:12 reminds us, this verse reminds us to look beyond the moment, to see the potential danger in some of our decisions. And the questions that we're going to be looking at will help slow us down. They'll help give us the perspective that we need to see potential danger ahead. The question that we're going to look at today is referred to as the integrity question. Remember, the easiest person to deceive is the one you and I see in the mirror. Because that's true, look at this next fill in the blank. It means that you cannot lead yourself lead yourself well as long as you are deceiving or lying to yourself. In fact, let's go one verse. I jumped over one. Let's go back one more on that. Here's what it means when we realize that the easiest person to deceive is ourselves. It means that the most difficult person to lead is the person in the mirror as well. This tells us and helps us to understand this. You and I cannot lead ourselves well as long as we are deceiving or lying to ourselves. Have you ever tried to lead someone who is kind of like a perpetual liar? It's almost impossible to do. But there's a bigger problem potentially at play here as well. You see, dishonesty tends to leak. In other words, if you lie to yourself, chances are you will lie to other people as well. And it erodes our credibility, not only with others, but also with ourselves. This is what we do. When we lie out loud on the inside, immediately, what do? We justify the lie to ourselves. We have to justify our actions with ourselves, or we're going to be at odds with ourselves. Any sane person can't go on doing something like this for very long. So we create a narrative, we create a story, if you would, that justifies ourselves over the lie or maybe even the half-truth that we've told. Now here's the crazy part of all this. We actually believe ourselves. We believe the half-truth. We believe the lie. We are actually a sucker for ourselves. If you're watching this and you're sitting with somebody, would you just look at them real quickly and just remind them, you are a sucker for yourself. Now, one of the great things about our messages is sometimes you get to say things you've always wanted to say to someone else, but you never were able to do it. Well, we give you a safe place to do that. We are indeed a sucker for ourselves. We can convince ourselves of just about anything. In any type of recovery group, rigorous honesty with ourselves and with other people is the first rule of recovery. In other words, we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to tell ourselves the truth even when it makes us feel bad about ourselves. Here's another way to put it. You will never get where you need to be until you acknowledge where you actually are. You see, a false premise will result in a faulty decision. You can't make the best decision for you until you are honest with yourselves. And then look at this next fill in. If you're not honest about why you're choosing what you're choosing, you're going to have a difficult time taking responsibility for the outcome of that decision. And we have a name for someone who doesn't take responsibility for their actions. We call them irresponsible. So, to decide your way into a better future, you and I have to develop the habit of telling ourselves the truth, specifically the uncomfortable truth about why we choose what we choose to do. And that leads us to the first question we'll look at. It's the integrity question, and it's simply this. Am I being honest with myself? Am I being honest with myself? So often we try to justify what we do to ourselves and to other people as well. I recently saw this. This is not on your outline. It's just be on the screen, but I thought it was very interesting. The idea of justifying. Justifying is really just a lying. I think there's some real truth in that justifying is really just a lying. That's why, notice this fill in, it helps to ask this question twice. It helps to ask this question twice and add one word to it. So we ask the question, am I being honest with myself? And we add the word really. Am I being honest with myself? Really. Let me give you some examples of that. Why am I doing this? Really. Why am I avoiding him? Really. Why am I postponing this? Really. Why do I keep making excuses? Really. Why am I going? Really. Why did I say yes? Really. Why did I choose to wear this? Really. Why did I choose to purchase or lease that? Really. Why do I drive this? Really. Why did I order that? Really. Why did I move in? Really. Why did I choose now to move out? Really. You see, when it comes to selling yourself on a bad idea, you and I are amazing. We are the best ever. We are experts in this area. when you and I build and argue a case for why we do something that we know we shouldn't do, folks, we deserve an honorary law degree. We are incredible. We are really, really, really good. You may not be good at selling others on certain things, but you are awesome when it comes to selling yourself on things. But here's what we need to remember. Our greatest regrets are associated with things, with opportunities, and people that we sold ourselves on. Think back to maybe a bad relationship, and everyone tried to warn you, didn't they? Your parents, your co-workers, your friends, but you assured them, I know what I am doing. Do you remember that sales pitch you gave to yourself? Maybe it went something like this. Well, yeah, it's true that he doesn't have a job and he hasn't had a job in a while, but he's just such a great guy and he's just waiting for the right opportunity. The fact that he still lives with his parents, he's a family guy. Yeah, he values family. And not only did he promise to pay me back for all that money that I loaned him, he said he'd pay me back with interest. And what if my mom doesn't approve? She's not the one dating him. I am. Now, I want you to think just for a moment. If you had a friend who used the same logic you used on yourself, if they tried to use that same logic to get you maybe to date their brother, and they came to you and they said, he's just perfect for you. Now, he doesn't have a job. He hadn't had a job in a long time. You would probably laugh at them and you would think, you are crazy. There's no way in the world that I want to go out with that person. Look at this fill in the blank. As soon as you and I start selling ourselves on anything, we should hit the pause button in our lives. We should pause because rarely do you have to sell yourself on a good idea. You just know. You just know when it's a good idea. You don't have to sell yourself. Now, if all things were equal, if you and I were wired to make the best decisions, this whole process would be very easy. But notice this, choosing what's best isn't natural to us. Now, this is a picture of an older gentleman here. This is Sir Francis Bacon. He was an English philosopher and statesman. He lived about 420 years ago. His heyday was around about 1600. But he wrote something as if he wrote it yesterday for us. The syntax is a little different than how we talk, but the point will come across. He writes this: the human understanding, when it has once adopted an opinion, draws all things else to support and agree with it. And though there'd be a greater number and weight of instances to be found on the other side, yet these it either neglects or despises, or else by some distinction sets aside and rejects. Again, he wrote this in about 1600. What Francis Bacon described in that quote is what we call the confirmation bias. Here it is on your outline. The confirmation bias is simply the tendency that we all have to look for information or arguments that support what we already believe and reasons that support that what we already are inclined to do as well. That's the confirmation bias. It empowers us to see what we already want to see or what we want to see, and it helps us to hear what we want to hear. On the other hand, it empowers us to tune out everything else to the contrary. If you think about that, and I thought about it in my own life, I said, you know what, that's absolutely true in my life. I think it's also true that most of us want to be proven right more than we want to know what's really true. And that undermines our ability to make good decisions. Think again about maybe that last bad relationship that you had and all those who warned you and yet you didn't listen. Once you made up your mind, once you had developed an opinion, it's true of all of us, we look for things to support that decision and we reject most everything else. Around 600 BC, there was a man named Jeremiah. He was a prophet of God, a spokesman from God, if you would. He actually has a book that he authored, found in the Old Testament portion of the Bible. It bears his name. We refer to it as the book of Jeremiah. But Jeremiah came on the scene as an advisor to several kings of the kingdom of Judah, and he came to advise some of their kings. By this time, the nation of Israel had split into two parts, and the northern part, which was referred to as still the nation of Israel, had been defeated 100 years prior by the Assyrians. It was no longer in existence. But the southern kingdom, where Jerusalem was located, Judea, was still in existence. Jeremiah was sent to advise their kings. However, most of the kings did not listen to Jeremiah. I guess that's a perk when you are the king. You don't have to listen to anybody if you don't want to. The first king that Jeremiah advised was named Jehoiakim. He became king as a teenager. At that time, Judah was paying tribute to King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Babylon was the world power at that time. And by paying tribute to Babylonian, they provided military protection, but they also allowed the local government to pretty much run itself as they wanted. But we find this in 2 Kings 24:1. During Jehoiakim's reign, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon invaded the land of Judah. Jehoiakim surrendered and paid him tribute for 3 years. But then we are told that he rebelled. To make matters worse, he entered into an alliance with Egypt, which recently had defeated the Babylonians in a major battle. This infuriated Nebuchadnezzar. Jeremiah begged Jehoiakim to reverse his course of action, his decisions. It was a foolish decision, and it also went against direct opposition to God's will for his people. But Jehoiakim ignored Jeremiah. And just as Jeremiah told him, King Nebuchadnezzar entered and came to Jerusalem. He laid siege to the city for 3 months. Finally, he was able to enter the city. He put Jehoiakim in chains. He marched him back to the city of Babylon, and he added him to his king collection. Now, some people collect coins, some collect stamps. I collect baseball cards. Nebuchadnezzar collected kings that he had defeated in battle or taken over their country. And on special occasions, to show his power, he would parade these kings that he had captured. He would dress them or deck them out in gold chains bound together, but they also would walk in a peculiar manner. They would have their right hands on the shoulder of the king in front of them, because not only did he enslave them, he also put out their eyes. They were blind and they couldn't see. This is exactly what happened to Jehoiakim. Nebuchadnezzar, strangely enough, put his son, Jehoiakim's son, whose name was Jehoiachin, in charge. And we find in 2 Kings 24:8, Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king. But notice this, it was a very short reign. He only reigned in Jerusalem for 3 months. We don't know what happened, but somehow Nebuchadnezzar changed his mind. He sent for Jehoiachin. He brought him to Babylonia. He added him to his king collection, and he appointed his uncle, a man by the name of Zedekiah, as the king of Judea. Little did anyone know that Zedekiah would be the last reigning king of the land of Judea. In 2 Chronicles 36:12, it is said of Zedekiah, that he, Zedekiah, did evil in the eyes of the Lord his God, and did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, who spoke the word of the Lord. And like the other kings before him, Zedekiah refused to listen to Jeremiah, and he soon refused to pay tribute to Nebuchadnezzar and to Babylonia. Jeremiah pleads with him again to reverse his decision. This was not going to end well, and Jeremiah knew it. When Zedekiah refused, Jeremiah took his message to the street, warning the people of their impending doom. When Zedekiah heard this, he had Jeremiah thrown into a cistern, which is a large water retaining basin. It was dry, and it acted as kind of a prison for Jeremiah. He couldn't get out. And just as Jeremiah had warned, Nebuchadnezzar comes to Jerusalem, but this time, instead of attacking the city, he decides to surround the city and starve the people out. Zedekiah soon realizes the mistake that he has made. He brings Jeremiah before him, and he begs him to go to God and ask God to deliver the city of Jerusalem. But it was too late. Jeremiah said, "The best you can hope for, throw open the gates of the city, allow Nebuchadnezzar to come in, and beg for mercy for him." But Zedekiah knew that Nebuchadnezzar showed no mercy, and he would be shown none as well. So he, in the middle of the night, fled the city with his family. He was quickly captured, and he was forced to watch Nebuchadnezzar's soldiers do this. In 2 Kings 25:7, Nebuchadnezzar's soldiers, made Zedekiah watch as they slaughtered his sons one by one. The last thing Zedekiah ever saw was his sons being slaughtered. Then they gouged out Zedekiah's eyes. They bound him in bronze chains, and they led him away to Babylonia. Jeremiah goes on later, and he explains to us why we are so prone, while the Judean kings were so prone towards self-deception, and why we are so good at selling ourselves on a bad idea or bad options. In Jeremiah 17:9, he simply writes this: "The heart is deceitful above all things." Your heart, my heart, our kids' hearts are deceitful above all things. There's a difference between dishonest and deceitful. Look at this next fill in the blank. Dishonesty is easier to spot. Sometimes you hear somebody, you just know, that they're lying. But notice this, because deceitfulness usually includes a mix of truth and half-truth and untruth. Because of that, deceitfulness is difficult to detect. You see, once our hearts get wrapped around something that we want, we send a message to our brain. It goes something like this: "Hey brain, I want this. Figure out a way to justify it." Now, our brains are smart. That's why we call them a brain. The brain knows it will be difficult to justify a want, but it is not just difficult to justify a need. So the brain says to us, "You need this." Not that you want it. No. No, you need this. And once we are convinced we need something, it is so easy to sell ourselves on it. And our reasons become our justifications. Our hearts are deceitful, and they can be dangerous because we don't merely lie to ourselves, we deceive ourselves. And Jeremiah writes on, and he says, our hearts are deceitful above all else. And notice what he says, they're beyond cure. In other words, this is a permanent condition of our heart. We don't outgrow it. We don't outmature it. And then he asks the question, who can understand this deceitful heart that we have inside? And the answer is not me, not you. That's why so often we'll say when we look back on something that we regret, we'll say something like this: I don't even understand why I did what I did. That's another way of saying I don't understand why I decided what I decided. Why did I choose what I chose? And while Jeremiah tells us there's no cure for this, there is hope. There is a way to keep track of our deceitful hearts and keep them in check. It's a 3-step process. We have to admit it, ask it, and then be curious. Let me just say a quick word about each one of those. First of all, we have to admit it. We have to embrace the uncomfortable fact about ourselves that we have a deceitful heart. And we need to be more open to information and advice that maybe conflicts with where our heart is trying to lead us or take us. We have to be more cautious when that salesman in our head begins selling us. We have to see that when we try to justify something, most often it's simply a way of telling ourselves a lie. We have to admit it. Second of all, we have to ask it. We have to ask the question, am I being honest with myself? Really? We have to have a heart-to-heart talk with ourselves. We owe it to ourselves to be honest. And then we have to be curious. We have to get to the point where we're curious about why. Why are we feeling what we're feeling? Why are we making the decisions we are making? Why are we so determined? What sometimes it almost seems like we are hell-bent, determined to do. We have to get to the bottom line, to the truth. We need to realize this, that what you and I don't know, what we won't know, what we refuse to know can certainly hurt us. It can hurt us. Jesus said in John 8:32, He said, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Dishonesty will imprison you, it will imprison me, but truth brings clarity. That's why we need to ask the integrity question twice. Am I really being honest with myself? Really? Am I telling myself the truth, or am I selling myself a future regret? So decision number 1 as we end today is the integrity question, or the integrity decision. I will not lie to myself even when the truth makes me feel bad about myself. Your decisions, my decisions, determine the direction and the quality of our lives, as well as the lives of those we love the most. Let's look at our next steps today. Several things I'm asking you to consider. I'm asking you to make the integrity decision and not lie to myself, even when the truth may make me feel bad about myself. If you haven't already memorized Proverbs 27:12, I'm asking you to memorize the wisdom saying, the prudent sees danger and takes refuge, but the simple keeps going and suffers or pays the penalty because of it. And then to keep the conversations going, so here's 3 questions I hope you'll ask, either in your life group or with some other friends. The first question is this: if a sales associate in a retail establishment said to you the kinds of things you say to yourself when selling yourself, how would you respond? Here's the second question: where do you struggle most telling yourself the truth? What are your go-to justifications? And finally, the third question: Jesus said knowing the truth can set us free, but acknowledging what's true can be terrifying. Is it possible that fear of what you discover about yourself by being honest with yourself is an obstacle to the freedom you desire? Let's close in prayer. Father, we thank you again that your truth really can set us free, but it can't set us free unless we're honest with ourselves. I pray, God, that we would be willing to ask the integrity question: am I being true to myself, really? Help us to be honest, even, Father, as that begins to cut deep into our hearts and to our souls. Because truly, if we are willing to begin to go down this path, God, you'll begin to reveal things to us that maybe we've never dealt with or we're afraid to deal with, but things that if we allow you to work inside of our hearts, you can begin to change us from the inside out as only you can. I pray, God, this would be the first step in bringing freedom into our lives by asking, am I really being honest with myself? In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.